The concrete walls are 7 inches thick. The steel door weighs 1,200 pounds. The window, if you can call it a 4-inch slit a window, faces a cement wall exactly 10 feet away. You will never see another human being face to face. You will never feel the sun on your skin. You will hear voices, distant and distorted, echoing through ventilation shafts like ghosts trapped in metal veins. This is ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States, and this is where the worst of the worst come to vanish. But this story isn't about the crimes that brought them here. It's about what happens after. It's about the slow, methodical unraveling of the human psyche when every single thread connecting you to humanity is severed, one by one, until all that remains is you and the voice inside your head. And sometimes that voice becomes something else entirely. Dr. Rebecca Malone didn't believe in monsters. She believed in brains, neurons, chemical imbalances, trauma pathways. She believed that every behavior, no matter how grotesque, could be traced back to biology and environment. You'll be interviewing inmates in Range 13, Mitchell said. His voice flat. There are long-termers. Some have been in isolation for over 20 years. We communicate through food slots. You'll never be in the same room with them. Protocol. Rebecca nodded. She had read the files. She knew who lived in Range 13. Thomas Keller, the accountant who murdered 17 people across 3 states before his capture in 2003. Amon Villanueva, cartel enforcer, responsible for torture deaths too gruesome to enumerate. And Marcus Webb, the subject of her first interview, a former police detective who killed his entire family and 3 fellow officers in a shooting spree that lasted 48 hours. Marcus had been in solitary confinement for 19 years, 4 months, and 16 days. The cell door was solid steel except for a narrow horizontal slot at waist height. Rebecca positioned herself in front of it, notepad in hand, digital recorder running. Mitchell stood 10 feet back, hand near his radio. Mr. Webb, my name is Dr. Rebecca Malone. I'm here to ask you some questions about your experience. Is that all right? Silence. Then, a sound like dry leaves scraping concrete. A voice emerged, thin and papery. You want to know if I'm crazy yet? The cell door was solid steel except for a narrow horizontal slot at waist height. Rebecca positioned herself in front of it, notepad in hand, digital recorder running. Mitchell stood 10 feet back, hand near his radio. Mr. Webb, my name is Dr. Rebecca Malone. I'm here to ask you some questions about your experience. Is that all right? Silence. Then, a sound like dry leaves scraping concrete. A voice emerged, thin and papery. You want to know if I'm crazy yet? Rebecca kept her tone professional, warm. I want to understand how you're coping with your environment. Coping, the word hung in the air, twisted with something between amusement and rage. Do you know what happens when you remove every single reference point a human brain uses to orient itself in reality? Time stops meaning anything. Space becomes abstract. Your memories start to feel like movies you watched instead of things you lived. And the voice, doctor, the voice in your head gets louder and louder until you can't remember if you're thinking or if someone is talking to you. Rebecca wrote quickly. Classic symptoms of extreme isolation. The voice, Marcus. Can you describe it? Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, dropped an octave, slowed to a crawl. It's not my voice anymore. It used to be. First year, maybe two, it was just my thoughts. Then it started commenting on my thoughts. Then it started arguing with me. Now. A sound that might have been a laugh. Now it tells me things I couldn't possibly know. Rebecca felt a chill trace her spine. What kind of things? It told me you were coming 3 days before you arrived. It described what you look like. Auburn hair, green eyes, small scar on your left hand from a childhood bicycle accident. It told me you're afraid of drowning. It told me your father died when you were 12 and you still dream about him. The notepad slipped from Rebecca's fingers. Mitchell stepped forward, hand on his baton. She recovered quickly. Professional mask sliding back into place. Information gathering. Marcus, you have access to news. Limited computer time for legal research. You could have found details about me. Could have. His voice was closer now, right against the slot. But I didn't. The voice knew. Just like it knows what you're going to find in cell 47. What's in cell 47? You'll see. When you get there. Today. In about 40 minutes. You'll understand then that some things can't be explained by neurons and chemicals. Some things, doctor, are beyond your science. The interview ended. Rebecca moved through her scheduled sessions in a fog, Marcus's words circling her mind like vultures. Cell 47 wasn't on her list. It wasn't part of the study. But when she asked Mitchell about it during their lunch break, his face went pale. That cell's been empty for 6 months. We don't use it anymore. Not after what happened with prisoner 01894. What happened? They walked to Range 13's isolated wing in silence. The corridor seemed darker here. They are colder. Cell 47 sat at the end, door sealed, no nameplate, no prisoner number. Mitchell's hands shook slightly as he worked the lock mechanism. The door opened with a sound like a coffin lid lifting. The cell was empty. Standard dimensions. -1 by 12 feet. Concrete bed platform. Stainless steel toilet sink combination. Nothing unusual. Nothing except the walls. Every single inch of the concrete walls was covered in writing. Tiny, meticulous script. Carved into the surface with something sharp. Something that must have taken months. Years to accomplish. Rebecca stepped closer, pulling out her flashlight. The writing wasn't words. It was numbers. Thousands upon thousands of numbers, ranged in sequences that seemed random at first, then revealed patterns, mathematical progressions, coordinates. And in the center of the back wall, carved deeper than the rest, were 8 words that made Rebecca's blood turn to ice water. She will come and she will understand. Below it, a date, today's date. And below that, carved with disturbing precision, was Rebecca's full name, her home address, and the exact time of her father's death 19 years ago, information that had never been public. Information she had never shared with anyone. Mitchell's radio crackled. His face went white as he listened. Doctor, we need to leave. Now, there's been an incident. Marcus Webb, he just died. Heart attack. But before he died, he was laughing and screaming your name. Rebecca couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to pulse on her. The numbers writhing like living things, because she finally understood what Marcus had been trying to tell her. What prisoner 01894 had discovered before madness took him completely. In absolute isolation, when every connection to the external world is severed, the human mind doesn't just deteriorate. It reaches, it searches desperately for connection, for contact, for anything that proves you still exist. And sometimes, in the deepest darkness, in the most complete sensory void, the mind reaches into places it was never meant to go, places where something might reach back. The emergency lights in Range 13 cast everything in shades of red and shadow. Rebecca stood frozen in cell 47. staring at her own name carved into concrete by a man who had died 6 months before she ever agreed to conduct this study. Mitchell grabbed her arm, his grip urgent, pulling her back toward the corridor. "Doctor, we need to move. Protocol says." "Wait." Rebecca wrenched free, moving closer to the wall. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was racing, falling back on training, on logic, on the scientific method that had guided her through a dozen years of studying the darkest corners of human psychology. "This is impossible. Prisoner 01894, what was his name?" Mitchell was already backing toward the door. "Samuel Hirsch, former mathematics professor, convicted of killing for graduate students in 2001. He was brilliant, doctor. Genius-level IQ. But the isolation, it broke something in him. Toward the end, he claimed he could see through time, that the walls were showing him futures and pasts that hadn't happened yet or had already been forgotten." Rebecca ran her fingers across the carved numbers, feeling the depth of each groove. The amount of work this represented was staggering. How had Hirsch obtained something sharp enough to carve concrete? How had guards not noticed during cell inspections? When did he start carving? "We don't know exactly." The writing appeared all at once, one morning. The walls were bare. The next morning, every surface covered. "We checked the surveillance footage from the corridor camera. Nothing. Just static for 6 hours straight, like something interfered with the recording." "That's not possible. Neither is what you're looking at, doctor." "But here we are." Mitchell's radio crackled again, urgent voices overlapping. "They're saying 3 more inmates in Range 13 are having simultaneous medical emergencies. Seizures, all of them. This facility has been operational for 30 years. And we've never had anything like this happen." Rebecca forced herself to think. Medical emergencies could be explained. Shared environmental toxins, carbon monoxide, some kind of chemical exposure affecting neurological function. But the writing, the dates, her personal information, that required a different kind of explanation. She pulled out her phone, began photographing the walls systematically. "What are you doing?" Mitchell demanded. "Documenting. This is evidence of something, even if I don't understand what yet. These numbers, they're not random. Look at the patterns, Fibonacci sequences, prime number progressions. And these here, these look like geographic coordinates." The impossible kept piling on top of the impossible. No one escaped from ADX Florence. The security measures were redundant to the point of absurdity. Every movement monitored. Every door requiring multiple authentication protocols. Rebecca and Mitchell ran toward the main corridor, but the heavy security door at the range entrance refused to open. "What study?" The corridor lights flickered, once, twice. Then they went out completely, leaving only emergency lighting painting everything in crimson. In the sudden darkness, Rebecca heard something that made her blood freeze. Voices. Multiple voices. Speaking in perfect unison. Echoing through the ventilation system. She understands now. She knows the coordinates are doors. Every place where someone died alone and afraid. The voices continued, ignoring him. Dr. Reeves understood. He saw what we were building. A network. A web of minds connected through the only thing that remains when everything else is stripped away. Mitchell's radio crackled with panicked reports from across the facility. Medical staff discovering empty beds where critical patients had been restrained moments before. "This is impossible," Mitchell whispered. "There are 340 inmates in this facility. They can't all just vanish." Rebecca was remembering the coordinates. The locations scattered across the country that Samuel Hirsch had carved into his walls. They didn't vanish. They left, through the thin places. Her phone buzzed, and no number. She almost didn't answer, but some compulsion, some need to understand, made her swipe to accept. Dr. Martin Reeves' voice came through, aged and fractured. Speaking from whatever hole he'd been hiding in for 6 years. "Dr. Malone, I know you're at ADX. I know you've seen the walls. I've been monitoring reports from inside through, let's call them sympathetic sources. You need to leave. Now, right now. What did you do? What did your study create?" "I didn't create anything. I discovered it. Human consciousness isn't isolated in individual brains. It's part of a larger field and network that we're normally too distracted to perceive. But in absolute isolation and complete sensory deprivation, some minds can tune into that network, and once they do, once they learn how to navigate it, they can move through it, not physically. Something deeper than physical. They can relocate their consciousness to any point where the barrier between mind and matter is weak. The coordinates, places where people died alone, death, extreme fear, absolute isolation, these things tear holes in the fabric. The inmates, they've been planning this for years. Every man in long-term isolation at ADX who participated in my study has been working together in a space I can barely describe. They've been mapping the thin places, finding the doors, and now they're walking through. Rebecca's rational mind was still fighting, still searching for the explanation that didn't require accepting that everything she believed about consciousness, about reality itself, was fundamentally wrong. If they've left their bodies, why are they dying? Why the medical emergencies? Because consciousness needs an anchor. A body is an anchor. When they move through the network, their bodies can't survive without them for long. But doctor, you're asking the wrong question. You should be asking what they plan to do once they're free. The emergency lights flickered again, in the stuttering illumination. Rebecca saw something that would haunt her forever. The walls of the corridor were changing. The concrete was becoming transparent, or perhaps her perception was shifting, allowing her to see into spaces that existed parallel to physical reality. And in those spaces, she saw them. Hundreds of figures, translucent and writhing, consciousness without form. Moving through pathways carved from pure thought and desperate longing. She was watching the figures, seeing patterns in their movement, and suddenly she understood with horrible clarity what Samuel Hirsch had been trying to tell her. The writing on the walls wasn't just coordinates, it was a map of every place they intended to go. And one set of coordinates appeared more frequently than all the others, carved deeper, marked with symbols she now recognized as emphasis, as priority, as primary target. She pulled out her phone. Entered those coordinates with shaking hands. The pin dropped on downtown Denver, population over 700,000, 50 miles from ADX Florence.